Star off to the left after a fake is going to run. He's at the 35, 40, 45, flag down. Giant 41-yard line, fumbles. The ball is loose, picked up by the Giants' Jimmy Patton. Swings to his left to the Giant 40, goes to the 45. I remind you, a penalty flag.
Ball reflected, but he's still caught here by number 33, Tony Dorsett. Look out! Look out! All right, Norm Thompson misses. It should be all over.
It's already almost to the ground. He just dropped that ball and missed.
Hello again, everyone. I'm Howard Cosell. Welcome to still another Monday night of NFL football right here on ABC. We look for a super game tonight. And as you
Field, where today the Tigers face the undefeated Cougars of Chatham, and what promises to be the matchup of the season. Hastings up the middle, where he hits the great wall of the Tigers defense, stopping them dead at the line of scrimmage. The Women's defensive line has only around 30 yards so far.
After the loss to Oakland, when they blew a 17-0 lead, Rodney Peete became the starting quarterback, and he has guided them to 4 straight wins. They don't expect...
Hello, I'm Jack Whitaker. How many kids have broadcast sotto voce? Star drops back, looks downfield, hits Dowler in the open. Their hero, a Ray Scott, a Summerall in Madden, made TV football akin to touring Lourdes. Pro football was once a dead-end kid. For the next 90 minutes, I'd like to salute its rise from sandlot start to weekend ministry, and how its voices of the game use language like Yasha Heifetz did a violin. Chris Schenkel and Kurt Gowdy helped drive pro football to the Ritz. So, among many will recall, have Al Michaels, Frank Gifford, Chuck Thompson, and yes, Howard Cosell. America once visited Aunt Martha each Sunday. Monday night meant PTA meetings at your school. Today, Aunt Martha is a channel surfer, and teachers study the Red Dog Blitz. Pro football is a mix of call and commentary. So sit back as we paint it then and now. How TV changed the NFL, and how the NFL has changed us all. Pigskins weren't made for flying, nor it seemed was pro football in its ragtag youth. At first, the NFL met hard scrabble towns like Canton, Muncie, teams like the Rock Island Independents and the St. Paul Ideals, who were 1920 rivals in Game 1 of pay-for-play football. Radio turned a deaf ear to the game and its potential. By contrast, Goliath baseball seemed more wed to the wireless than later Bogart and Bacall. The 30 Steelers had to pay a Pittsburgh station to put games on the radio. Bill Stern, Ted Using, and Graham McNamee all beat football's drum, but oblivion stilled its band. A Chinese proverb put it well: one generation plants the seed, another gets the shade. Forget glamour, white lights, and coast-to-coast coverage. Pro football in the early 20s meant proximity, split blood, and flattened noses. Color it black and blue and call it obscure. The game was, as they say, strictly from Peoria.
When I was growing up, I knew about Red Grange and Illinois, and I knew about the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame. And pro football was almost a secondary kind of sport.
Those early years seemed one long day's journey into night, but the price was right. In New York, the Giants were born for $2,500 in 1925. That year, Red Grange, the Galloping Ghost, quit college ball and signed with the Bears.
It wasn't until Red Grange came into the Polo Grounds as a professional and drew that enormous crowd for the first time that we began to be aware of pro football.
That early awareness came through in its first vocal defenders, the masterful stentorian Ted Using, the dramatic Bill Stern, who called a game as though it had been scripted in Hollywood, and the lyric Southerner, Red Barber. But despite the coverage, in 1936, lagging sales moved the NFL title game from Boston to New York. Glorified sidelight or emerging sport, no one knew, but new voices would soon bring a higher fervor to the game.
Down the far sideline, down the 10, into the goal line, touchdown!
Football broadcasts were just rapid-fire delivery and exciting almost every minute of the time. So the personalities of the broadcasters kind of were in line with the personalities of the games of baseball and football.
Witness the kinetic charge of Ken Coleman of the Cleveland Browns.
To the 25, over the 30, 35, 40. He's round to midfield. Peters chasing him at the 30, and he is gone.
My radio delivery was much more up than my baseball radio delivery because it's a different game and there's 22 people in motion all at the same time.
Another who powered the game over the airwaves was Jack Buck. His style barbed and satirical, his popularity immense.
Another blitz is on, and they hit Keith Lincoln outside, and Lincoln gets the ball from 40 and across midfield, and he may go all the way.
When I do a broadcast and it lasts for 3 hours, when that game is over, I want to tell you, I'm worn out.
In 1938, Wellington Mara complained that the press viewed pro football like wrestling. But even wrestling had a bona fide media niche. The next year at Ebbets Field, TV tried to craft one for pro football by turning the cameras on a game between the football Dodgers and the Philadelphia Eagles. The crowd, 13,000. The voice, Alan Walsh, announcing to several hundred sets, most of them in Manhattan. Two cameras tried to cover things like the single wing and the button hook pass. But two cameras were more than saw what was coming one December Sunday, 2 years later.
One of the most extraordinary days in the history of pro football occurred at the Polo Grounds on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Day. Early on, announcements came over the public address system with General so-and-so, please report to his headquarters. With Admiral so-and-so, please call his office. With Colonel so-and-so, please report to his base. Now, the people in the stands did not know what was going on, but we, in the broadcast location, got the interruptions of the games from the studio.
And now he's hit and hit hard about the 27-yard line. Wilbur Kennard made the tackle. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Stay tuned to WOR for further development.
Well, where's Pearl Harbor? We found out, of course, very soon after it was in Hawaii and all that. But it was a remarkable day. The crowd knew that something was going on because these high-ranking officers were being called out of the stands to report. And, of course, the word finally did spread throughout the crowd. And the Dodgers won the game, and the Giant fans went home very sober and very quiet because it was that beginning, of course, the day that will live in infamy, Pearl Harbor Day at the Polo Grounds involving the Giants and the Dodgers.
Some 600 NFL players served. 66 were decorated. 21 didn't come back. Pro football kicked off again in 1946 and began scoring some points. But the real touchdown was to be alive.
When they came back after the war, all of the players that had played in college before the war and would have been eligible to be playing while they were in the service, they thought the professional football was a pretty good thing.
To the NFL, the addition of such former college stars as Crazy Legs Hirsch brought some recognition and credibility. But radio seemed unable to lift the league to that next level.
College football, in truth, was much more popular than pro football then, with all the bands and the alumni and the color and so forth. And pro football was pretty much thought of as a blue-collar sport.
Baseball was the game then. Pro basketball was nothing. pro football was just getting really sort of started in the league, and they make changes every year. But television made pro football, and NFL football was tailor-made for television.
Soon now, the 2-second Bananas would team up.
To paraphrase Ring Lardner,
Interest in the 1940s was a side dish the NFL forgot to order. Re-entered television in scattered markets across the land. The picture, black and white. The sound, uneven. The money, as small-timey as the league. In 1951, the entire NFL got only $50,000 in TV profits, less than one of today's 30-second commercials. Help sprang from a network, Dumont, which flaunted Gorgeous George, Demolition Derby, and the NFL on Saturday night as of 1953. Football's rival, CBS's Jackie Gleason. Had the owners known what lay ahead, they might have sung, "And Away We Go," for away they went, and how sweet it was. Among the soloists was the man who helped create, sell, and later broadcast the games.
There was one man at Westinghouse that loved football. And they had dropped the college football after just 1 year. So I got he and a couple of his bosses or whomever to sit down with me at the William Penn Hotel. And having been 2 years at the agency and putting together radio and television networks, I knew how to draw up some budgets and so forth. And I'll never forget, as I'm telling them of why they should really grab hold of what's going to be the sport, the coming sport of television. Finally, my friend said to me, "Ray, how much?" And I still remember swallowing very hard. I said, "Well, exclusive of what you spend for commercials, that's up to you. But for time, talent, rights, and a game of the week on Saturday night, then we only have to black out that city." I swallowed real hard. I said, sole sponsorship, $750,000. They said, "Fine. Now, what network?"
Born in 1935, the Dumont Television Network was certainly not considered top of the line, but its voices of the game were. Among them, Ray Scott and Chuck Thompson.
My big memory, greatest memory of Dumont was I went to Chicago to do a football game, and I'm riding down Michigan Boulevard in a cab, and I look up over a theater, and there's my name. Chuck Thompson, Dumont, and then the Bear game right underneath that.
One big thing about pro football, then, one announcer. I was by myself in the booth. No color man, no third man for comments, nobody back in the studio with cut-ins.
I've often said they probably should have collected money from me to do the game, but paid me 10 times as much getting ready to do it, because it's preparation.
I went down to see George Halas at the hotel. Just happy to see me, anything he can do. And I said, "Well, what I need is your roster. Who did you bring with you, and what are their numbers?" He took me through the whole team, number and position, you know, just great. That was fine. So I sit down the next day, and I made up my little charts that I try to work from. And I found out he'd give me about 7 names that didn't make the trip. You know, in those days, that's the way they operated.
They actually had no broadcast locations for us to work out of. In the Polo Grounds, I broadcast out of the scoreboard in right field. There was no room anyplace else. And we used to peer through those apertures, looking down on the field to see the play. It was so narrow, and there was just no room for people to get by.
And one of the most difficult stadiums would have to be Cleveland. You worked up on the roof in a shack. You climbed the ladder through a hole in the roof and then walked down to the booth. Now, that is a little difficult, depending on how much luggage you're carrying with you.
How do you get to the spot where you broadcast? Well, you crawl around the roof and get there. If you get to that little alcove, that's where you'll be. Suppose you slip. Those things happen.
I would bring a little overnight bag with me and an electric blanket. I discovered that engineers are bright people. They have plugs in the poof. And I would plug it in, and I put on some slippers, put my feet down on the blanket. My feet would be warm so I wouldn't shiver.
And from the warmth of their homes, millions watched the NFL on Saturday nights. But 2 years later, in 1955, Dumont went dark and silent, and TV audiences lost their eye on the NFL. But a year later, in 1956, CBS had picked up the pieces and began broadcasting pro games on Sunday afternoons. The architects of this crucial reconstruction were League Commissioner Bert Bell and the Tiffany Network sports president, Bill McPhail, who knew that the battle to win NFL fans had just begun.
And we were all endeavored to do the same thing, which was to put the National Football League on the map, so to speak.
And I think those of us involved in it, we just took it as a personal challenge.
With the big TV markets joined, it was not long before watching the NFL was as natural as a smile.
I've heard stories that men of the cloth, while working on Sundays, had that little plug in their ear and the transistor radio in their pocket when the Colts were on the road so that they could keep abreast of what was going on.
What was going on was a new civic religion. Suddenly, football was being ferried into living rooms, general stores, and gentle small towns. Each Sunday, TV linked you to the Colts' wondrous Johnny Unitas, or Superman by Lake Erie, the seismic Jimmy Brown. In New York, weekends hailed a team that was coming to define the NFL just as the NFL was exploding across the nation. My, what a confluence. The Giants winning 6 titles in 8 years in the nation's TV and ad capital, as CBS, the NFL, and Madison Avenue rejoiced. Ethel Merman was once asked if Broadway had been good to her. Yes, she said, but I have been good to Broadway. Substitute the NFL for Broadway and the Giants for the Merm. Their leader, quarterback Charlie Connolly, a warrior who starred with his arm and mind, and more with his heart than both.
Our Giant teams in the 50s probably had, per person, more character than any team ever assembled.
Frank Gifford was the first leading man in the National Football League. He was as handsome as a movie star. He was well-spoken, he was clean-cut, and he was a great football player. And right alongside of him was Kyle Rhodes, the All-American boy from Texas, who was good-looking, as Frank is, blue-eyed, and a great athlete. And Kyle could do wonderful things on the football field. And you had the personalities like Sam Huff, who was the colorful middle linebacker, big number 70.
The entire defense was big, and like the numbers on their back, their names are etched in memory. Robustelli and Modzelewski, Katkavage and Greer.
They were great ball players, and they dominated the play on the field.
They dominated their conference, too, winning titles in 1956, 58, and 59, yielding the fewest points in the league, and firing the passions of millions. Suddenly, the aspect of pro football, said by many not to exist, became the rallying cry that is heard so often today. Pro football was finally getting some real media play. In that first season on CBS, the Giants became big time in the hardest town on earth, their own New York. Frank Gifford remembers.
We came out on a frozen field and we had sneakers on. It was one of those games which everyone did their job perfectly. Nothing went wrong. There was no turnovers. It was the perfect game, and we beat a team 47-7 that we had tied earlier in the year, 17-all.
Although the Giants' new celebrity helped pro football everywhere, it was particularly pleasant for Sunday's heroes at home. Bars resounded with this new game. Our team, right here, on top. Front tables at 21 were offered. Their guests, someday American presidents, and here and now movie stars of uncommon allure. And the gift was very much at home.
It was a wonderful time to be in New York, and we kind of shared the stage with the Yankees, with the Mantles and the Marises and the Scourins, and we not only shared their stage, we shared their stadium. It was Mickey Mantle and I shared the same locker, and we were both MVPs of the two leagues.
Although he was not the spokesman for the National Football League, in effect he was.
Gifford's face and form graced dozens of print ads, and his TV endorsements were considered pure gold.
The New York Giants Quarterback Club.
And your Renault dealer will give you this free gift just for coming in to see the new 60s. A bottle of My Sin perfume by Lanvin for your wife or girlfriend.
Thank you, Fragrant Frank.
As far as the myth of my being involved as a Marlboro man, no, I was never a Marlboro man. Charlie Connolly and Cliff Livingston were, I didn't do that.
Frank Gifford speaking for Lucky Strike.
You know, Yankee Stadium is full of strange sounds for anyone who's ever played there. The sound of cleats. Man, that's some racket when 35 men pound their way through a concrete tunnel on the way to the field. Then you run smack into the noise of the crowd. They cheer or they boo, but either way it makes the hair stand up inside your helmet. There's another sound I remember. This one. When I'd stretch out after a tough game and enjoy the taste of a Lucky.
You know, without tobacco sponsors, television wouldn't come along as rapidly as it did. And little did I know then when I joined the Giants that I'd get involved being the voice on some of the Marlboro commercials.
This is a man who smokes Marlboro cigarettes. I'm a guy who likes to work on my car. You don't forget to smoke, though.
The advertising agency, Leo Burnett, and Philip Morris asked me to do some voice on other commercials, which included those by Julie London. To me, one of the most beautiful, Titian-haired, blue-green-eyed female that ever lived. And so they pulled a little prank on me. They thought, after I'd done one or two of the voiceovers, that Chris had never met Julie. So they set up a nice cocktail lounge and all the execs, and I walked in, and instead of Julie saying hello to me, this was a setup. She said something that I thought I would never hear out of that beautiful mouth. It wasn't that bad, really, but it wasn't hello. The shock value worked because but then a big hug and a kiss, and I just adored her.
While the Giants were the toast of New York, local fans could only see them on TV when they were out of town.
New York City was blacked out for Giant games when they played at home. At the outset, many people in management of professional sports thought that the broadcast of the sports event would diminish the size of the crowd. People would stay home and listen, or people would stay home and look.
We developed fans where they put super antennas on their roofs to get the CBS station in New York, and then you could just feel the surge of these people.
Many people would leave the city and go to nearby cities in Long Island or Connecticut that had the telecast outside the 50-mile radius of New York City. So the radio broadcasts were very important.
Again, Connolly fading back to throw after a beautiful fake. He hits Gifford and takes it over on the 145. Breaks here in the clear. He's inside the 30 to the 20, and he is dropped down on about the 12.
It wasn't long till 1958 when the Giants and Colts had their historic game at Yankee Stadium, and Bert Bell saw to it that Chuck Thompson and I did that game. And, of course, that, to me, was the beginning of the popularity of the National Football League as we know it today.
December 28, 1958 marked the NFL's first salvo across baseball's bow.
I said to Chuck, gee, how do you want to do this? And he said, well, you're the home announcer. And then, you know, Chuck's a friend, so the fairness policy was in. And I said, Chuck, let's flip a coin. Is that all right with you? And he said, sure. I won the toss. And I thought, smart Chris, he's going to get the second half and let Chuck hang out to dry, do the first half, you know. Not really, but, you know, just kidding. And little did we know.
10 seconds, 9, 8, here's the kick by Steve Myra. Good! The game is tied, and we're about to have the first...
none of us were too darn sure what the heck we were supposed to do. I didn't know what was going to happen. And the network said, "You're up."
Though Thompson's overtime calls were lost to history, Bob Wilf's radio cast remains.
Deep into payoff territory.
The fans were so boisterous in cheering for the Giants out in the bleachers. They shook the main power cable of the entire NBC telecast out of its socket.
The screen goes blank. You know, we haven't got any picture. And there had been, I don't know how many, quite a few people in the NBC booth that afternoon. And I turned around and looked, and they were gone. Shank and his spotter, me and my spotter, and the guy, you know, Crank and Gain, they were the only people in the booth. Everybody had disappeared. Panic. What in the world happened?
We're dead. I just kept on talking, you know, thinking that somebody'd hear me and would get to me and tell me what happened.
The big problem was to inform referee Ron Gibbs that we had a technical problem and we had to have a timeout. Now, while this is happening, and they're trying to get Gibbs's attention, we were blessed that some fan came from the other end zone running down the field. And maybe he was a little happy, worked up.
I don't know whether that was contrived or not. You know, it's not for me to say, but looked a little suspicious. But we needed time because we didn't want to lose any of the game because it was that exciting.
And when Ron Gibbs saw this happen, he knew that he had to stop the game because the spectator would interfere.
Well, fortunately, one of the NBC engineers knew where to go, and he got that thing back in.
He passes. Let's see if Muchler got that ball and went out of bounds. Muchler took it out of bounds on the 1 yard.
The intensity of the fans at Yankee Stadium, I knew that this was going to just carry up all over the country because we had a huge rating on that particular telecast.
Barking out the signals for the Baltimore Colts. Unitas gives to Amici. The Colts are the world champions. Amici scores.
You better go to your doctor and see what's wrong if you didn't like this excitement.
Quite aside from the fact that it was so dramatic, so well played, and that it was played in New York with all the media attention, there was something else that made it the greatest football game ever played. And that was the sportsmanship of the New York Giants. There were no alibis, no excuses. They themselves, almost man for man, said, the greatest game I've ever been in. What a thrill to be there with such a tremendous display of talent.
Johnny Unitas, a superstar, was born. And I say born, people knew that he was around, but he was magnificent that day. There was Lenny Moore, there was Ray Berry, and their wonderful performance. We had household names by that time in New York, and all of a sudden they were household names nationwide. That sold the television people, hey, this is big time stuff.
1960s America was at once stirring and infuriating. Pro football had its own Grand Canyon of a divide. On one hand, the now august NFL, led by a child prodigy, Commissioner Pete Rozelle. On the other, something called the AFL, the Almost Football League. The NFL came to mean Vince Lombardi and his famous power sweep, blitzkrieging the enemy's Maginot Line. As head coach, he made the G on the Packer helmet sport's most famous emblem. By contrast, the new league was born in 1960 because the NFL refused to expand. At times, it seemed alien, more UFO than AFL. Rebel, underdog, threat to the status quo. Looking back, what a perfect metaphor for the time.
You know how much it cost for a franchise in the American Football League in 1960? $25,000. If you had $25,000, there was a franchise available. If you knew the people, you could get it.
It looks so good. It looks so easy. It looks like what every every very wealthy guy wants to get involved in because it's a sport, it's my team, I own them, and it's a kind of a macho thing.
Or was it a surrealistic thing? The teams dressed and even looked like those in the NFL. And sometimes they even played like them. But the names were foreign and hard to get used to.
Most Americans thought the AFL players came from Upper Slobovia, and the NFL players came out of the colleges. They just wouldn't accept the AFL. Paul Crispin, my broadcasting partner, didn't want to do it. I had to talk him into it. He said, that league is nothing. He said, I don't want to lower myself with that league. He got into it, and we started doing the games in '62. Frank Ewell Field, a high school field in Oakland, where the Raiders played. Jefferson Stadium in Houston, another high school field. Patriots played a different place every year. They had no home field. And you might say, well, how did it finally make it? Well, it made it through television, and made it through the owners who stuck together, put their money up, and kept signing good players, and year by year, the league got better.
In those days, those owners used to walk around with cash. I'm talking about stacks of $100 bills, and they would like to get somebody off to the side when they were trying to sign him and wave that money in front of him. Bud Adams down there in Houston did that because everybody was buying for the top players in the country, and they talked with cash.
The competition became very visible, too. And so it became a very personal thing. It wasn't something that you either won or lost in a boardroom and nobody knew about it. Here, everybody knew about it.
I was blessed to have been around in the back rooms during draft days and owners or scouts taking players and keeping them on an airplane until they signed or hiding them away so that the AFL couldn't find the NFL. Or in many ways, I think the AFL did a better job than the NFL.
I hated them. Still do.
People got familiar with their players, and in time they developed their own fans, very loyal fans, by the way. And there was a hatred between the NFL and the AFL.
And anybody that was involved in those days has the same feelings that I had.
Very wisely, the new owners said that if we're going to go out and bid at the highest number for the best players, let's start with the quarterbacks. In fact, let's see if we can even raid some of the National Football League quarterbacks.
And I'll guarantee you that if you talk to Lamar Hunt, he'll tell you the same thing that I'm telling you.
They offered John Brody and all these big quarterbacks big money to move, and the NFL, some of those fellas who had some money sense said, this is madness what we're doing.
I felt for the first time a merger might be possible, might be necessary for both in when the NBC signed the single network contract with the AFL.
And Carl, you right there.
Joe? To the AFL, too, television was the means to an end.
Billy Sullivan here is our witness. Looks beautiful. Thank you.
So we realized that we had to get a single network deal, and otherwise many of our teams would be losing television income and exposure.
In order to keep pace with the AFL, Roselle needed to put all NFL teams in a single network package. He did this by persuading Congress to pass a bill exempting football from monopoly charges. It was a huge step, but the young wonderkin wasn't without error.
NFL made a bad mistake. They blacked out their home games. They always have. When the Giants played in New York, you couldn't see a Giant game. Redskins in Washington, Detroit, Philadelphia, and they put Crispin and me on the West Coast games. We did 2 games a Sunday, Earlywood game, 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock game. Most of them involved Kansas City, Oakland, and San Diego. All pretty good teams. And we would come in at 4 o'clock. And this one year, that was the only pro game you could see in these big cities that were blacked out on the NFL. And our ratings shot up. And Lance Allworth and all these fine young players the AFL signed became sort of household names. The next year, the NFL changed their policy. They still made them black out home games, but they brought in like the Bears against the Packers or the Eagles against somebody, and you saw an NFL game, and our ratings went back down again. But that one season that was blacked out in those big cities really gave us a chance to get, it's like a vacuum salesman. All he wants to do is get in that door and show the product. And we got to show the product that year.
I think that in many ways, all of the announcers doing the old line NFL teams were brainwashed a bit. We were told to, and we felt anyway, I suppose, that the AFL was nothing to take seriously. Those were just scrimmage teams, and it would eventually disappear. But it happened fast. NBC's television of those games was very important. It gave young players the opportunity to see, here's another league, a chance to bid, make more money. And then Joe Namath came along, and just like that, they were for real.
Showbiz kingpin, promoter, and Jets owner Sonny Werblin was looking for star power, and he found it in the smile and the arm of an Alabama quarterback.
When he signed this big contract, big as that, $400,000, I think a lot of it was term insurance. It made national headlines in the sports pages. And he came in and he really added a lot to the AFL. And he had the charisma, he was colorful, he was cocky, and he was one of the instruments that pushed the AFL forward.
This guy was a real phenomenon. Not only was he a great football player, but he was a great creation as a public image and a star by Sonny Werblin, who was the star maker.
Broadway Joe! Dynamite and very hip with lots of heart and lots of lips. A swinging ladies man who has a ball. But put a quick ball in his hand and right away you'll understand why Broadway Joe's the greatest of them all. He's a hero. He's a...
Meanwhile, in the senior league, it was manual labor as usual, and no man in the history of the NFL personified hard work more than Vince Lombardi.
Everybody's grabbing out there. Nobody's tackling. What are they doing through the center of that line out there? I'll tell you something, Leroy. You're not going to get your job back unless we get a better performance.
He was the most gracious loser I've ever known, and the most miserable winner. And I asked him why one time. He said, they don't need me to tell them they lost. It's just when they win, get fat-headed. That's when I get on them.
Too much out there! Lombardi was a very emotional, firebrand person. Landry was very subdued, seemed like, subtle. I think, however, I think the game ate both of them up on the inside.
A lot of people criticized Landry. Stone face, without emotion. That's not true at all. A great coach.
December 31st, 1967. Lambeau Field, Green Bay, Wisconsin. The two generals exchanged warm greetings before making history in the Ice Bowl.
I was doing that game with Gifford, Ray Scott, and Tom Brookshire. We went to the stadium, it was 15 below 0. I borrowed a stocking cap from Elijah Pitts. I looked like the wrath of God. Gifford was standing there as though it was a summer afternoon. I said, don't you want a hat? He said, no, I don't need one. I said, well, you're tougher than I am, man.
Lombardi, as I wasn't there, was alleged to have said, weather's in the mind. That last drive, to me, was the greatest triumph of will I've ever seen. Everybody was miserable. Players' hands were like stone. They never made a mistake. Never dropped a pass, never fumbled. Unbelievable.
16 seconds remaining.
When Bart and he had conferred along the sidelines, their final timeout, they could have sent the game into overtime with a field goal. Lombardi said, let's get the people out of this miserable weather. Let's go.
Starr takes the snap. He's got the quarterback back. And the Green Bay Packers are going to be world champions.
Only Bart knew that the other running backs were not going to get the ball. The sneak game was a shock to his teammates. When it was over, he was told that some of the Cowboys had frostbite. Losers get frostbite.
Lombardi would retire a month later after beating the AFL's Oakland Raiders in what would soon be called the Super Bowl. As for Landry, he would have his day again, and again, and again.
After the game, the three of us, Gifford and Brookshire and I, were flying to Chicago with New Year's Eve.
We took off in about 20 degrees below zero, and my door, the front part of the plane, flew open.
It was open by about a foot. And Gifford was in the front seat. I had my arms around him. Brookshire was shooting scotch out of a rubber flask into Gifford's mouth.
The pilot, fortunately, was a local pilot and knew a landing strip that had no lights on it.
Gifford grabbed a hold of the handle and the armrest, undid the handle, and pulled the armrest right out of the door. Now the door was open like this.
His controls were literally freezing up on the inside of the plane.
The pilot said, I can bank the plane and close the door, but I don't know which way to do it. I said, well, let's not do anything. And we landed in New Holstein, Wisconsin. We were headed for the woods. I said to Brookshire, when we hit Tommy, I said, lean forward just a little. And he always remembers that. We closed the door. We stopped about 50 feet from the woods, closed the door, took off, went to Chicago and celebrated New Year's Eve. And I think I really celebrated.
November 17th, 1968, the Oakland Coliseum. The Raiders and the Jets play a seesaw game that would be forever remembered by a little girl's name. Merrill Harmon called the action on the radio.
Back to pass, his name is throwing long down the sideline for Raiders. There he is. Here's the pass, the ball is down, the kick is on the way. It is good. Jim Turner with a 26-yard field goal puts the Jets in front.
It was coming up on 6 o'clock. It looked like the Jets had the game locked, and NBC elected to cut away because they wanted to get Heidi started on time because they were bucking the primetime shows on CBS and ABC.
Now, a special program in living color on NBC.
They shut it off, and only the West Coast saw the finish of that game.
LaMonica looking, LaMonica throwing.
While the rest of America watched the story of Heidi, something else was happening in Oakland that defied fiction.
Mike Eyeshide to kick off, and downfield comes the football. He blitzed it on the ground. It's going to be fielded by Christie at the 10. He bobbles and he goes back to pick it up on the 12. Christie is shaken, fumbles the ball. It is recovered by Oakland for a touchdown. The ball bounced into the end zone. It was recovered. It was recovered by Preston Rydell Huber for a touchdown. Now listen to this crowd.
I packed up my briefcase and was leaving the booth, and the assistant up in the booth yelled, Gowdy, Gowdy!
And I go down in the dressing room after the game, and I mean, you know, everybody's heartbroken, and we still don't know what happened. I had no idea NBC had cut away.
So I go back, and he said, here, the earphones to the truck, the remote truck. And they said, look.
One of the funny stories, as I recall, was Weeb's wife, Lucy, called him in the dressing room to congratulate him on winning championships in 2 leagues, the NFL and the AFL. It's just great. And he said, Lucy, what are you talking about?
The miscue by NBC raised pandemonium on the network switchboard.
I think it's been documented that the switchboard kind of blew up in Chicago.
And it would have been fun to be a Monday morning at the National Football League offices in New York and say, how could they have done that? Look at all the phone calls and all the mail we're getting. And then I bet there was a point not soon after that where they said, you know what? This is really telling us something. We've got ourselves a monster sport that people really do care. And television is very important as a partner in covering professional football.
So the Heidi game will never be forgotten, even today. Nobody remembers much about the game, but they know there was a Heidi game. What was the Heidi game? Well, that was a Heidi game.
Everything I read about and hear about is how strong the team we're playing next Sunday is. And we'll find out Sunday. We might lose by 59 points. I don't know. I doubt it. I think we got a heck of a shot of winning. We'll beat anybody in the world, and I think we're going to win next Sunday.
My arrival in Fort Lauderdale at the hotel where the Jets were staying was interesting. I was greeted by Earl Christie, one of the defensive backs and special teamers. As I got out of the cab, here's Earl standing in the front of the hotel. It was a balmy evening, and he grabbed me and said, Merle, we're going to win the Super Bowl. Do you hear what Joe said? Joe says we're going to win we're going to beat the Baltimore Colts. We're going to win the Super Bowl. I said, Earl, the game's a week away, you know.
If Namath's irreverent prediction caused an uproar among NFL fans, one broadcaster who believed the Jets had a chance was analyst and ex-NFL player Al DeRogatis.
I asked him on the air, what do you think about this game, Al? And he said, the Jets will win this game. And I about jumped out of my chair. They were 20-point underdogs.
If the New York Jets are to win this football game today, Kurt, I firmly believe they must get 100 to 130 yards on the ground, 9 to 13 first downs. If they do that, this is going to be a whale of a football game.
You mean they just can't come out here and just fill the air with footballs today?
That's for sure.
The Colts had this reputation, you cannot run on the Colts. Well, as we all know, the Jets did run on the Colts in the Super Bowl, and that was really the key to the win. And Joe Namath said, I shouldn't be the most valuable player. The most valuable player should be Matt Snell, who gained like something 121 yards, same side all the time, running left on Baltimore's right, because they felt that's where the Colts were vulnerable.
Namath on a handoff to Matt Snell. And this crowd is up and standing. Snell at the 5, Snell at the 3, Snell touchdown!
They really felt they could beat him because of ability.
Ability means Namath and Snell and George Sauer. And when the game was over, it was just like Joe Willie said it would be. Jets up 16-7.
Joe Namath gave confirmation that it was more than the old NFL line, that the American Football League was real and there were a lot of good football players out there.
The war was over. The merger, agreed to in 1966, would now be consummated.
Really inspired a whole new vision of pro football, because equality was a very important thing. And with the AFL beating the NFL in that Super Bowl game, Super Bowl III, it was a major step. Created a lot of interest, obviously.
The AFL really didn't force the merger. Al Davis and some of his pals didn't want to merge with the NFL.
I talked to some owners in the league, and I quietly explored it. And I went down to Dallas, and I stayed at Tex Schramm's home. And he would meet with Lamar Hunt of the AFL during the day and negotiate. And then I would call around all the NFL owners during the day and advise them, in effect, what was going on. And they knew what was going on. And so that's how it finally evolved, with an agreement between the AFL and the NFL.
But I'll tell you, to this day, the American Football Conference, there's a lot of people that don't have any use for them.
If the 1960s was pro football's golden age, in the 70s, the NFL went platinum. Like defense? Try Doomsday, No Names, Steel Curtain, Purple People Eaters. Great coaches? Shula, Noel, and Madden. Great games and teams spread like jam. Miami's perfect year, Pittsburgh's 4 Super Bowls, and the '71 Christmas Classic, coining the term sudden victory. And 2 other psalms from sports' new religion. Remember Hail Mary? Roger Staubach does. The 1975 playoffs. Cowboys are down against the Vikings. Time's running out as Staubach winds up and throws a prayer. One fan asked, was God a Dallas fan?
He got it! Touchdown! I didn't know they had it for a while. I got the ball back.
Or how about the Immaculate Reception, which Coach Madden has tried to forget?
Bradshaw trying to get away. And his pass is broken up by Tatum. It's down. Michael Harris has it. And he's over.
Each Sunday, millions would no sooner miss the NFL than burn the American flag. In 1970, a new network joined CBS and NBC as keepers of the flame. Welcome Pete Rozell's brainchild, which became an institution. Parts storyline, made-for-TV theater, and showbiz.
During the 60s, we had 4 or 5 games on either Friday or Saturday night, I think. And so we had got our feet a little wet and felt that it would have a big impact.
The other networks had the opportunity to get the Monday Night Football package.
I could not get CBS to bid because they felt that sports was just going too far. Number one, you had college football on Saturday, you had NFL on Sundays, then you started the NFL doubleheaders on Sunday, And the housewife was simply not going to put up with Monday Night Football.
That was their, you know, the nighttime segment, prime time. That was their big strength.
Bob Wood was president of CBS, and when he called me Billy, I knew I was in a little bit of trouble because, and he said, Billy, sometimes you're so naive. If we had Monday Night Football, what would we do with the Doris Day show?
Well, little ABC. Back in those days, it was little ABC because they didn't have much of anything. And they said, we'll do it.
ABC was getting a test pattern rating in their prime time, and so they really had nothing to lose by going with it. And Roone Arledge, a very innovative and creative genius of our time in television, took the idea to Leonard Goldenson, and Leonard said, let's go for it.
It had everything you'd wanted. It was as good as South Pacific. It was all of it.
Prime time, baby, prime time.
Under the lights, all live, it is a special moment.
15 seconds to air. Stand by, all cameras. Ready with slow motion and isolated cameras. Stand by, videotape, and roll tape. The tape is rolling in less than 5, in 3, 2, 1. Take tape.
And those three words themselves are magical words. Monday Night Football.
It had such magnetic power that you just couldn't wait for Monday to get over with so you could get home and see the Monday Night Football game.
America loved it instantly, even in that first year before I got there. Keith Jackson did it the first year, and then he went to college football. I came the second year.
Roone Arledge did a heck of a job in picking the people. I didn't always agree with them, but it sure turned out big.
Roone was a good friend of mine, and we talked about it, and he asked me many questions about what I felt about it, and one of the things I suggested was Don Meredith. When he said he wanted a three-man booth, and he asked me about Howard Cosell, and I said, don't be ridiculous.
Nevertheless, Arledge selected Cosell, and under the primetime lights, he flourished. Brilliant, militant, and outrageous, he became the largest...
It was a different ball game than the regular games. This was a Monday night entertainment. And those three guys kept them entertained. Most of the time, Cosell and Meredith were going at it.
I didn't know you cared.
And Meredith would put him down, and Cosell would come back, and the other guys calling the play-by-play and trying to survive.
Thank you, Don. And when you talk about the Baltimore defense, you're talking about a truly great football team.
And it was an interesting outfit. The three trained bears, they used to call them.
I think more than anything else, and you'd have to get that from Roone, but I think he wanted an identity. He wanted everyone to know the football was on ABC on Monday night, and who better to bring that identity than a guy that you either loved or irritated you to the point if you wanted to kill him.
The love-hate relationship that this whole country had with Howard Cosell, that had nothing to do with football. I mean, we tuned in to watch a football game, and people really became very much involved with enjoying or disliking intensely a man who was happened to be in a broadcast booth with a couple other blokes. And they were pretty interesting chaps as well. Whether it was Keith Jackson or Frank or Don Meredith. It became, the chemistry of that booth was something to behold.
While Monday night's ratings soared, Cosell's strained relationship with the disapproving press spilled over into acrimony.
How many of you look to your own papers? Have sports writers who are still writing, Monday Night Football's a disaster. Whom are they in touch with? Whom are they writing for? How do you permit this to go on? What kind of surrealistic nonsense is this? They're not in touch with contemporary America. They can't possibly write for it. They want some puristic version of some former jock saying Dwayne Thomas, 4-3.
As I look back and reflect on it, and I have many, many times, I think Howard would have liked to have been the play-by-play. He would have liked to have been the host. He'd like to have been the announcer. He'd have liked to play the games.
He was the key offender in being more important than the game itself, than the broadcast. What he had to say took precedence over anything else that took place.
Here was this arrogant Eastern New Yorker who everybody really couldn't stand, particularly in Middle America, with his nasal quality, his I'm more intelligent than you are delivery, that Meredith could just puncture a hole in with a simple thing like, "Oh, come on, Howard." And, I mean, America would, did you hear what Don said? Did you? And Don just said nothing other than, you know, what everyone out there wanted to say.
Turn out the lights, the party's over. They say that all good things must end.
Cosell had asked me to come over and have a drink with him at the Warwick Hotel, and we were in there, and he was complaining about some things, and these little guys don't know what they're doing, cowboy. And Arledge came in. And I waved Rudin over, and he came over and sat down with us. And I said, your guy's unhappy here. And Rudin says, let me, wait a minute. He says, he's unhappy. He says, you know, all I do is defend you all day on the telephone with these affiliates and everybody. Everybody wants me to get rid of you, but I haven't.
And he wouldn't, as ratings climbed even higher. In Denver, the Cosell haters started throwing bricks.
Make sure Cosell gets this picture. He stinks.
I didn't like him then. I don't like him now.
He taught us all how to be journalistic, how to report a game in a different manner. You know, as the company line, you always took the side of the officials in the sport. You didn't question the coaches, the officiating, the ownership, the fans. He taught us we could open a whole door and go into a new room and question anything and provide a whole new approach to reporting a game.
He had a lot of guts, and he cut a new swath in sports broadcasting. Now it's popular to go out there and ask the tough question. He was doing that in the early days.
Every sports announcer who works today should remember that they learned a lot from a guy like Howard Cosell.
Whether you liked him or didn't like him, he was a presence that he could not be denied. When he opened his mouth or whenever he looked into the camera, there was something that happened. And that's what this business is all about, making something happen between you and that.
Arrogant, pompous, obnoxious, vain, cruel, persecuting, distasteful, verbose, a show-off. There's no question that I'm all of those things.
Again, Namath taking that ball from center. That slant play Al was talking about. And look at that blocking along the line. Great blocking. Winston Hill, Bob Talamini. Number 53, Dennis Gorbat, a little late on.
It is said that with the exception of the equator, everything begins somewhere. Instant replay began at the Army-Navy game in 1963. Soon it went uptown to the pros and to the clear advantage of the analyst. For years, the play-by-play man had been a Rubik's Cube of actor, writer, director, and cameraman. Now the color man came forward, reviewing what the picture had shown. The great broadcast teams balanced first downs and explanation. Kurt Gowdy and Paul Chrisman, Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen, Cosell and company, which at times seemed to be the world. Always the star was TV's perfect sport, quick, compact, and visual. Football widows conceded, then converted. The medium was the message, and the message endures.
I was head of CBS Sports, and Tony Verna, who was our director, really invented it. I merely gave him permission to try it.
And it revolutionized how television covers a football game.
Of course, technologically, it's gone miles beyond that.
I mean, you know, you used to have one replay, two replays. Now you might have 7 replay machines. You might have 13. You may have 15. You may have 20 on a Super Bowl. And yet the announcer has got to be the guy that guides, the play-by-play guy, has to guide everybody through this thing.
Now they put the play back again, and they'll say in the truck, talk up there. And so the analyst has to come in, and, well, this is Jones, look at that. Here comes it. See that cornerback come up and hit him, and that's why the play didn't work. So now you got a play that we're calling live. Now they got another play that they have to talk over, and it's just common talk over and over again.
I wish most analysts would shut up at least once or twice during the game. I think that 100% of them feel compelled to say something at the end of the play. It'll be 1st and 10. They'll hand it off to the tailback. He'll run into the line, no gain. It's 2nd and 10. Why can't you shut up until they run the next play?
The opposite strategy, as practice on Monday night steered off Gifford and Michaels, is to cover every play from every angle.
And one of the great things I think that we're afforded with having, in effect, two analysts, is that there are so many plays in football and in all sports that just aren't black and white. I mean, it's not, here's the play, and this is the only way you can look at this play. There's no other way. That's not true. There are analysts who will beat it to death and browbeat the audience and contend that, but very often that's not true. There are all kinds of gray areas in most analysis, and a lot of things can be looked at through the prism in different ways. And I think that's one of the great benefits of having a couple of analysts. Dan and Frank can look at it with different perspectives.
I don't think you need three announcers on anything. And one guy says something that's very sharp, and then the other guy's got to, he can't be left out, and I don't just...
You might ask, who needs two analysts if you have John Madden? To millions, the Madden Pat Summerall act is the best of all TV football.
He always celebrates with his head. I mean, you get your hands up first, then you see if you can go find a guy to bump heads with. Where's the guy? 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 There's the guy.
You know, and I'm going here, and I'm going there, and then the thing, and the airplane, and the blimp's coming here, and the guy's down here, and he went through here, and he, you know, and Pat, you know, I can say like 100 sentences, and Pat in 2 words can say what I was trying to say in 100 sentences.
John has often said, I'm tough to work with. I can go rambling and rambling and rambling and drawing pictures and X's and O's and do all these things. And Pat can take it and make it all make sense. I hope that's true. I think that's part of the key to our success.
For decades, network TV had pro football to itself. Enter 1987, and cable's new window on the land. First ESPN, then TNT joined football's family. A family which later changed when football's godfather, CBS, lost NFC rights to Fox. The NFL without CBS seemed as strange as the British Empire without India. Yet it survived as Big Game America.
I was at the party for 60 Minutes, and I was sitting with a CBS executive. And I knew that the negotiations for the television contract were coming up, and I asked him about the future, and he said, I'll promise you, don't worry. As long as there is pro football on Sunday afternoon, CBS will be a part of it.
In 1994, the unthinkable happened, and CBS Sports found itself out in the cold. The Fox network had won the rights to broadcast the NFC.
I think when CBS lost football, it was the biggest shock that any of us had. I mean, there wasn't, you know, maybe people can say now that they saw it coming, but none of the people that I know saw it coming.
Well, I actually cried tears when I heard that happen, because the fact we at CBS had started the NFL, and now there's, excuse me, there's 5 networks involved in the telecasting the NFL, and CBS is not even one of them.
Whatever it took, they should have kept it. And I'm sure that today they would like to have made that decision.
When John Madden and I first signed our contracts with Fox, it was Fox Sport. There was nothing else but football. They didn't even have a sports department.
I think the NFL and pro football has made Fox a real network now.
A lot has happened to pro football since the early backwater years when such visionaries as original Cleveland owner Paul Brown stared into an uncertain future, even with the likes of an Otto Graham. Since early television cameras first followed the flight of a white ball in the NFL's early bid for prime time, much has happened to television and the game. The credit? The announcers. Broadcasting not in black and white, even when the picture was, but with tints and bold pastels, a panoply of color. Imagine two men stranded on a South Sea isle from, say, New England and California. The strangers differ in age, religion, income, and career. Their common interest is the National Football League. Call it war or art. From TV's golden age, via stop action, through Aunt Martha to her VCR, NFL broadcasters have won the public, the welcome beckoner of 1,000 afternoons. Our Sundays and Monday nights are different because of them, and so in a sense are we. No wonder kids dream of being voices of the game.